Well, Shabbat Shalom, happy Sabbath, good evening, brethren. Welcome to the Sabbath service for, well, what is it on the Hebrew date? Where it is the 6th day of the 11th month on God's holy sacred calendar. Hey, and we're finally pulling this seal out of the way and coming into the studio, our cold studio tonight. I've had 2 heaters running for the last 20 minutes or so to try to heat up the studio a little bit, but with the sub-freezing weathers we've had here in Alabama, which I'm sure most of you have experienced because most of the country is feeling the effects of this cold wave that has blown in on us. All right, we mentioned it's the 6th day of the 11th month. We're 1 week into the new pagan Roman year of January 2022, the new pagan year of 2022. This is January 7 tonight. It'll be January 8 in the morning, but in the morning it'll still be the 6th day of the 11th month. On God's holy sacred calendar, we are in an extended year this year, or a pregnant year, as it's sometimes referred to by the Jewish folk who keep the calendar preserved for us. And that means there's 13 months this year. So after the 11th month, where there will normally be a 12th month, and that would be the end of the year, there's going to be one more month this year. There will be a 13th month this year. Now, a reason why I am distracted over here on the side and still punching up a bunch of buttons is because to give notice, I got to go back to that screen, to give notice to those who watch for a notification that we're live from the weekly bulletin page, which I'm amazed there are a number of you that watch for your notification there to tell you that we're live on the Sabbath service page, and that's fine. But I just have to do a couple of little things that sometimes I make it during the opening music, and sometimes I don't. I have to copy this link and then switch over to the page called Weekly Bulletin, and then hit the Create Post button and paste that link. Oops. See, I forgot. I also have to go over to a note page and paste that shared link there, and then go back and copy the heading up above it that says live stream of Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for January 7, 2022. And all right, I got it. It took me a few moments, but we got it. It looks like it's about to post. Going slow tonight. Even the internet may be affected by this cold weather. It's slowing everything down. All right, it made it over there. Finally. Brethren, I hope you had a good week. I had a busy week myself. I was kind of, when there's a verse in the Bible that talks about hope being deferred, making the heart sick. When you're hoping to do something or planning to do something, and then something happens to where you don't quite get to it or do it, or something prevents you from doing it, you can feel depressed. You know, that the King James version of saying depressed in this case of this verse is to say makes the heart sick. Or in other words, you get depressed a little bit for a little while. And I had planned to do something, and I didn't get all the information until very late today. Too late to be able to make a drive I was going to make over to Huntsville, Texas, because tomorrow at noon Central Time, at Mexican, I ate some Mexican food today, thinking I was going to Texas and would be eating in Mexican restaurants while we were, while I was over there. But that was good, but I'm still digesting that, so pardon me. But I didn't find out until too late to be able to go to finish some of our plans. So when I came back, I had turned all the heat in the house off while I was going to be gone, and I came back to a cold house, jumped in my bed, turned on this electric mattress I have in the bed that heats up quick, that even before the room will heat up, that mattress will heat up, pull the covers over me, and then when it came time to come in here and do tonight's Bible study, I didn't want to get out of that bed. Oh, I felt toasty and good. And I began to feel a little better after rest, and I had been praying in bed, and God kind of smoothed it over for me and said, let me know, hey, look, the person who died, you're going to see them in the resurrection, and so cheer up, and and we're going to do something. I found out one of the things that was kind of good to find out, when I spoke to one of my friends in Huntsville, Texas, and the person who died was a longtime minister over there. He entered Ambassador College in 1968 as a freshman, and I can't remember whether he was married at the time or met his wife in college and got married a little later. I think we'll probably find that out, because tomorrow, after our regular morning service, I plan to live stream a memorial for Mr. Albert Foy, the late Mr. Albert Foy, the minister, a long time in Huntsville, Texas, and he had a special role to a lot of us in the early days of the apostasy, a lot of us who didn't want to jump ship, who wanted to wait and watch and see what God was going to do, and not just wait and watch, but be praying about it fervently. What should we do, and what's happening, Father? And we just stayed on board the ship until we either got thrown off of it, or until the particular portion of the ship that we were on went underwater. And by that I mean it went to where either that congregation that people were in locally were no longer observing or keeping the Sabbath, annual and weekly. And during that period, while services were still being conducted on the Sabbath under a new apostate leader, many people who stayed on board the ship without jumping off onto this Vanity Plate Church of God group or that Vanity Plate Church of God group. I know I'm stepping on some of your toes, and some of you did that, and some of you have gone out of that now, and you tune in here because you realize supporting division is not something that pleases God. But many who stayed on board the ship without jumping ship early, we would look for a place where it was still under the umbrella of junior, where we wouldn't be jumping ship, that was still observing the feast. And one of the last and longest of those who did that was the Huntsville congregation under Albert Foy. He was very accommodating, very loving, nice tall black man. That he was one of the first black students to be accepted to Ambassador College, and we're coming out of a time of Jim Crow days and pre-civil rights and that kind of thing, and an attitude in the country where things were segregated. Even some blacks wanted to keep some things segregated for a long time. Even now, the function in the Junction in Inslee, part of Birmingham, Alabama, where the Erskine Hawkins Park is located. Erskine Hawkins was the musician who, along with a couple of his other sidemen, wrote the fabulous music called Tuxedo Junction. And each year they have a function in that junction. They have a big celebration in honor of Erskine Hawkins, the author and orchestra leader, famous because of his writing, Tuxedo Junction, which Glenn Miller helped to really make famous. But even Erskine Hawkins himself sold over 1 million copies of his recording of Tuxedo Junction. Glenn Miller sold 7 million in a short period of time, and 7 times as many as Erskine Hawkins, and really made the tune famous. And it's still recorded somewhere around the world. Every year somebody comes up with a new rendition of Tuxedo Junction. Very popular, famous song. And I mention that because each year when they hold the function in the Junction in July, part of it's on the Sabbath, but after the Sabbath's over, I'll often go, and I've often recorded little excerpts for public radio use. And when I go, and it's mostly an all-black crowd, I'll often be confronted, well, now, you just be quiet, because this is a black event, and we want to keep it that way. I mean, that's today. That's like last year and the year before that, comments like that are made. And, I respect that, and I understand it even. There sometimes people appreciate the way God created difference, and they want to bask in that difference sometimes. And I don't think God's upset by that. I really don't. We have to respect one another when people want to do that. It's also was kind of nice that Mr. Foy's congregation was one of the first to mix. Well, no, they weren't. Birmingham was one of the first to really mix. Birmingham had who was it? A niece of the famous black man. They even have a history, a historical day, a holiday, a national holiday for Martin Luther King. And a niece of Martin Luther King was a member of the Birmingham congregation of the Worldwide Church of God. And I'm saying these things just to point out, Albert Foy was one of the first black students at Ambassador College. And he became a very influential, very helpful, very exuberant minister among the Church of God, and played a very important role during the apostasy because he stood up against the apostate leadership and was one of where many congregations was told, no, you can't hold the annual feast days, including Feast of Tabernacles. For a long time, Albert Foy was allowed to hold Feast of Tabernacles, such that he became one of the last ones. There was another one in Mississippi, but who used to claim they were the only one. And when I went there one weekly Sabbath just before Feast of Tabernacles and tried to stand up and say, hey, there's one other one beside Mississippi, some people held me down, set me down, and said, no, don't tell him, don't interrupt him on that. And I'm like, what? So I went up and told him after service, sir, there is, what you stood there and said is not true. There is another congregation still keeping the Feast of Tabernacles within the confines of the new leadership, which, haven't gone out and started a Vanity Play Church of God group. And that other one was Albert Foy, and he kept that up for many years until finally the apostate leadership cut Albert Foy off from its association. And but he had those who wanted to continue to keep the Sabbath that were in the Huntsville area. He continued to do that, and brethren would still from many places, New York, New Jersey, California, many states would come and attend the Feast of Tabernacles in Huntsville, Texas, under Albert Foy. And we appreciated him. He had a big role during the early days of the apostasy, a big role of faithfulness in spite of persecution to the contrary for ministers. He managed to not get cut off for 10 or 12 years before they then finally did axe him from the association with the apostasy. So you don't always have to jump ship. They'll throw you off when the timing for you is right. Of course, we're well past that because the apostasy has cut themselves off from even being called Church of God themselves any longer. But in memory of Albert Foy, I wanted to attend that memorial that's tomorrow, but I found out something else from some of those who helped set up a camera in the room. I'll be able to hook into the camera and live stream it after our regular service tomorrow. So about a half hour after we finish our regular service tomorrow, for those of you who might like to see that memorial. Mr. Foy died about 2 weeks ago, and a memorial for him is being conducted tomorrow on the Sabbath, and that'll be noon Central Time. So what would that be? That'd be 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and then not a bad time for those of you on the West Coast, Pacific Time, that would be 10 a.m. We used to start one of the services in Pasadena at 10:30 a.m., so that's not too far off from that time. Anyway, that's what's coming up. That's what's happened. Also, I understand, I'll have to check the notes on that. Either Stephen Glover or his wife died this week. Stephen Glover was a minister in the Church of God who stayed faithful and ministered for a long time. I'll check my notes on that and say more on that tomorrow. I got an email I'll have to check. All right, brethren, did I mention tonight is January 7 on 2022 on the pagan Roman calendar? Again, it's the 6th day of the 11th month. And I did check that and verify that tonight in Arthur Spear's The Comprehensive Hebrew Calendar. Plus, we have several other ways we run that date. And they all check up, showing that tonight and in the morning is the 6th day of the 11th month. It became the 6th day at sunset, and so it doesn't change at midnight like the Roman calendar does. It stays the 6th day of the 11th month through the night, into the morning, and all the way to sunset the next sunset. All the same day, all the Sabbath. All right, now, why am I wearing a hat and my red leather jacket? Because that's sub-zero temperature, and if I try to turn on the heaters in the room, you'll hear this rumbling noise in the background that the mic picks up. Now, it feels good, but probably sounds not so hot, or sounds hot or something, on the audio. So I'll turn it off, keep my leather jacket on for a while. In fact, I was wanting to go out and get some goatskin gloves. They're white, and they're great for driving. Help keep your hands warm when you first get into the car, and it's the car and the steering wheel is ice cold, where your car's been outside. Okay, I hadn't got those yet, so I'm not wearing the white goatskin gloves tonight. What do we have? The main thing we have for tonight will be a telecast from 1983 by God's end-time Apostle Herbert Armstrong. The past few weeks he's been taking us on his Far East travels. We had one overall one to begin with, and then we focused in on on Thailand, and now we're going to Manila and the Philippines. And we're going to waste no time further getting into that, except, to mention that we're in the early stages of 2022, so let's just pull in on this for a moment. In January, right here, we're on the month of January. At the end of that second week, we're Friday night, the 7th on the Roman calendar, and in the morning it'll be the 8th of January. That's where we are on the calendar. We have a couple more months to go before we hit the next feast day, the Passover, and the Passover memorial, the evening of the 14th of April. It just so happens, as I've mentioned before, this year, 2022, the dates in April, the dates of the days of the month, coincide with the dates for the days of the first month on God's Hebrew calendar. So at sunset on the 14th of April, it becomes the 14th of the first month. And so in the evening on April 14 will be the Passover memorial this year. Now at this moment, I'm still planning. I have to, it's kind of probably a good thing I didn't take off and go out of town just yet, because I got an email from the people at the Birmingham Art Museum saying, hey, you know, our hold on that date of April 20 for you is kind of up in the air. You need to come in and do our papers. I've already cut, in fact, a whole week ago, I had the bank cut a cashier's check for a $1,500 deposit. It's going to run at least $2,000 to rent that Birmingham Museum of Art Upper Plaza for that evening, and we're going to fund it regardless if I may come. And we've got early bird ticketing set at a price that's just a small fraction of what the cost will be. I mean, even if 100 of you came for that dance to Birmingham, Alabama, the cost you'd pay at $10 or $15 a person. If you buy a couple's ticket, it's just $10 a person, $20 for a couple on the early bird price using the discount code of 2021. I got to also maybe add 2022 since the year changed. But if you use the discount code and buy an early bird ticket, just $10 a person if you're coming as a couple. That means one ticket, two people on one ticket. Or if you buy a single ticket, it's $15. A family ticket with up to 7 children in the family, under 17 years old, $40. So that's way below $10 per person for a family with 7 kids. And then widows indeed. If you're 65 or older, you may come free. And so we're basically covering that. And then on top of that, we are paying the orchestra. And we're able to get the orchestra at a huge discount. I've already cut them $1,000 deposit, so I have those funds, and they came from some income that I personally developed last year and set aside for this annual spring dance that we'll be initiating this coming April 20. So hopefully you can make it here. You can find a hotel that's at a reasonable price for you, maybe in Bessemer. Or if you have some good second tithe, plentiful second tithe, and want to stay at the Birmingham Tutwiler, which is just 1 block from the Birmingham Museum of Art, that'd be a nice place to stay. And I will be seeing that lady. In fact, I'll need to go see her, the sales manager. And I'm trying to get the rooms for under $100 per night. And, you know, some of those rooms with 2 double beds, 4 people. You know, if you're single, 4 singles could come and stay in the same room. 4 men in one room, 4 women in another room. And really get your costs down for coming. So we'll help work some of that out for some of you if you'd like us to help you with the hotel. And I'm trying to get a group rate, just like sometimes we've been able to do during Feast of Tabernacles time. All right, anyway, enough on that. And we're rest of January, rest of February, rest of March before we hit the first holy day season, the spring holy days with Passover and the days of unleavened bread. And then we start the big 50-day count to Pentecost, which this year, you see the purple in the month of June. Looks like June. Can I go tight on that? Will we be able to see it? I'm not sure. No, it doesn't zoom into the right place on this camera shot we have prefigured. But it looks like the first Sunday in June, and that looks like June 5. So the evening of June 4 and the daytime of June 5 is Pentecost this year. First day of the week, a Sunday. You know, we kept it on Monday for many years, like 37 years. And God then refined our understanding. He refined the correction he made in 1937 to tell us we count Pentecost not from the annual Sabbath, the first annual Sabbath that comes in the days of unleavened bread, but we count it from the weekly Sabbath, that is either Passover or one of the days of unleavened bread. We count 50 days from that weekly Sabbath. And we do count from the weekly Sabbath. One day from that weekly Sabbath, as it has always been, is the Wave Sheaf Day. And so that Wave Sheaf Day is the beginning count, day number 1 of the 50-day count. And exactly 7 weeks later, like 8 weeks in a day, from one Sunday to the next Sunday is 8 days. It's the 8th day. If you count each of the days, there are 8 days involved. From the day you start on Sunday to the day you wind up on another Sunday, there's 8 days. 7 days in between, actually 6 days in between the two. But you count both the days, and it's 8 days. And the same thing with 7 weeks to the next same day of the week is 50 days. All right, you can do the math till you're blue in the face, but it all works out to be the same day of the week, 7 weeks later, 49 days later, later. But it's the 50th day. Day 50 is another Sunday, and it's June 5 this year. All right, we'll be going through details on that, because there are people trying to tell you today that you should keep it on day 51 so that we stay in our old tradition of observing it on Monday. Our old tradition, God corrected, and it's still, and when we were keeping it incorrectly on Monday, we were counting it, though, as if Monday were day 50, not day 51. So those who try to say, we need to keep our old tradition, well, you changed the tradition, those of you who say that. Because in our old tradition, we were counting 50 days, but we were counting from the morrow after the Wave Sheaf Day, instead of counting from the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. We were 2 days after the weekly Sabbath. We still counted the Wave Sheaf Day as 1 day after the weekly Sabbath, but we counted Pentecost to but the way we were considering our count by counting from the day after the Wave Sheaf Day, including that day, it came out to day 50 on a Monday. But God finally corrected our misunderstanding because of a misrendering of Leviticus 23, verses 15 and 16. That from should not be in there, especially in that verse 15. All right, we'll go over that another time. We're going to move on to Manila. Let's go to that special trip that Mr. Armstrong had, that God opened doors and blessed him to speak before the leadership in the Philippines, that he's sharing with us in this video. I'm going to go ahead and this telecast he gave in March of 1983. I could be wrong, might be May. I'll try to check that while we're playing this video. So we're going to go ahead and move the screenshots on over to where we're going to see not Mussolini saluting the Roman Empire, but Mr. Armstrong. And where do we hide him? Greetings, Graham. Oh, let's see. What happened to that video? Oh, maybe it does start with this shot. I think it does. Okay, so we're going to widen the screen out just a little bit. Hope everybody's in a prayerful mood during this. It's a Bible study, but it is the Sabbath. It is an ecclesiastical service, and we are coming before our Creator on the Sabbath day and remembering Him as our Creator. And God's end-time apostle always wanted us to come in a service, Bible study, and especially the regular weekly Sabbath service, in an attitude of reverence before God, prayerfully and mindfully aware that on the seventh day God created the Sabbath by resting, and telling us to remember Him in a special way on this day. So, let's give careful ear to God's end-time apostle with his special from the Philippines, this Manilla Special.
Why such high unemployment? Why the sick economy? It's still very, very bad and has been all over the world. Why the violence all over the world, especially in such localities as in Central America, in El Salvador, in North Ireland, over in the Middle East, in Lebanon, and in places like that? Why is it that the number one problem that seems unsolvable now before humans all over the world is that of human survival? For the first time in the history of mankind, the weapons of mass destruction, nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction, exist that can erase all human life from the face of this earth and do it suddenly. And that means your life and mine and everyone that you love and care for. As all this evil crept up on us, this world condition of violence, of immorality, of everything that is wrong, as it crept up on us so gradually in the last 75 years that we've become calloused to it, and that we don't really realize it, that we just somehow come to take it for granted as if it had always been that way. It hasn't. And we're coming and coming rapidly down to a grand smash climax at the end of this world. But people have become callous to the condition in the world. Now, God says this of this time, and this is a prophecy for this time, and it's in Isaiah 58 and verse 1 in your Bible, where God says, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Israel their sins." You know, I wonder if he uses the word transgressions when it says show the world their transgressions and Israel their sins. You know that recently, just very recently, a poll was taken in France that showed that over 90% of the people in the nation of France do not believe there is such a thing as sin. They admit that you can make a mistake once in a while, but they don't even believe in sin. Now, sin is the transgression of God's law, and when the churches have been preaching that the law is done away, how can people believe in such a thing as sin? Yet God says, cry aloud in this day and show his people their sins. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek shall come suddenly to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom you delight in. Behold, he shall come, says the Lord of hosts. And then it goes on to show it's talking about the second coming of Christ and not about the first coming of Christ at all. And God says that there will be someone preparing the way for that time at the end of this world, preaching the same gospel that Jesus did, the gospel of the kingdom of God. That is the world of God, God's civilization that is going to replace this present civilization that is Satan's civilization. The world does not realize what has happened to it. Now, John the Baptist was a voice in the physical wilderness of the Jordan River, and John the Baptist was merely proclaiming a voice of the human messenger, Jesus coming, born of a woman as a human being, God with us, God in the human flesh. But he came to a physical temple built of stone and wood and other metals. And he came to a physical people, Judah, his own, who received him not. But he came proclaiming a message. Now, gospel means good news. It was an announcement of the coming world, the world of God, the world tomorrow that we've been proclaiming on this program for about 50 years now. That is coming. And this voice is crying out. Now recently, on a trip to the Far East, I spoke to the people in the Philippines. That is, to a group of people in the Philippines, a group of people who are subscribers to the Plain Truth magazine. And they came to hear me because I am the publisher and editor of the Plain Truth. And I want to tell you something about that after a while. But I was speaking to these people, and it was a voice crying out. Now, not in the physical wilderness of the Jordan River, but in the spiritual wilderness of modern religious confusion. A religious confusion that says the law of God is done away, that there isn't any such thing as sin. And crying out about the coming of the spiritual Christ, coming in power and glory as a spirit, not as a physical human being, and coming to his spiritual church that will rise in the air and meet him, translated into spirit beings at the time of his coming. And so this voice has been proclaiming that all over the world. Now I was proclaiming it to Plain Truth readers in the Philippines. Well, greetings, everybody. I did not come here this afternoon to entertain you. This world is bent on entertainment. This world does not know what's going to happen to it, and I'm here to tell you this afternoon. Something is going to happen very soon that you don't suspect. And this is real, I'm not kidding. So if you have ears to hear, you better listen. I want to read to you a statement that was made several years ago. A man who could understand the condition at the time and foresee what probably was going to happen. I'm going to tell you what is going to happen. And I'm speaking about General Douglas MacArthur. But on August the 6th, 1945, the first atomic bomb exploded over Hiroshima, Japan. The surrender ceremony of Japan took place aboard the United States ship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, thereby ending the war. Presiding over this surrender was General MacArthur.
Of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government.
Realizing the frightening importance of that day, General MacArthur delivered one of the great speeches of recent world history. And before the Congress of the United States later, he said,
on the second day of September 1945, just following the surrender of the Japanese nation on the battleship Missouri, I formally cautioned as follows. Men, since the beginning of time, have sought peace. Various methods through the ages have been attempted to devise an international process to prevent or settle disputes between nations. Military alliances, balances of power, leagues of nations, all in turn failed, leaving the only path to be by way of the crucible of war. The utter destructiveness of war now blots out this alternative. We have had our last chance. If we will not devise some greater and more equitable system, Armageddon will be at our door. The problem basically is theological and involves a spiritual recrudescent an improvement of human character that will synchronize with our almost matchless advances in science, art, literature, and all material and cultural developments of the past 2,000 years. It must be of the Spirit if we are to save the flesh.
Those are the words of General MacArthur, and they never were more true than they are at this minute. Now, several years have gone by. Conditions have worsened. They have not gotten better. The United Nations was going to bring us peace. World War II was the war that was to end wars. World War I was the war that was to end wars. None of them ever ended war. None of them ever will. Nuclear World War III, I want to tell you now, this afternoon, World War III is definitely coming, and approximately soon. I don't mean this year. It could come possibly as soon as next year, probably not that soon, but it is coming very soon. But it is definitely coming. I recently returned from Europe, and there I had meetings with important, with political officials over Europe and heads of state, including one king. And I came away realizing that definitely the amalgamation of the European nations into a United States of Europe is coming, and soon. I talked to men who were working feverishly to bring that about undercover. You don't read about that in your newspapers. You don't hear it in television news. I saw it. I talked to the men who were the leaders and who were doing it. In the Bible, in the 17th chapter of Revelation, is a prophecy that shows that when this thing comes, it will be a very short duration. It will not last long. And it will end in the second coming of Christ. So that is how close we are right now to Armageddon, the end of this world. Now, I'd like to read you a prophecy of what is taking place right now. As a matter of fact, it is taking place before your eyes and in your ears this very moment. Here is what is prophesied, and you are witnessing it right now. In the 24th chapter of Matthew and verse 14, where Jesus Christ, looking into the future, said, "And this gospel of the kingdom," that is the gospel he preached. That gospel was suppressed within 22 years after Jesus Christ died and the church was founded. In 22 years it was suppressed, and it has not been preached until God raised me up to begin to preach it to the world. In 1953, precisely 1,900 years, or 100 time cycles. A time cycle is 19 years. The sun, the moon, and the earth are in exact conjunction every 19 years, and then you begin another time cycle of time measured by the earth in relation to the sun and in relation to the moon. 100 of those time cycles. Later, after the gospel was suppressed, I began to preach it over the most powerful radio station on earth. That was Radio Luxembourg in Europe. And it was heard all over the continent of Europe, over many nations. He said, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end," he was speaking of the end of the world, "then shall the end come," the end of this world. I had been proclaiming that same message from one end of the United States and Canada to the other prior to that for 19 years. That began the very first week in 1934. 19 years or one time cycle later, I began on Radio Luxembourg in England, in Luxembourg in Europe. I'm still proclaiming it. And we are now very near to the end and the time that Jesus Christ spoke of. Next, after this gospel is proclaimed to the world, beginning in verse 21, it says, "For then shall come great tribulation." That is a time of world trouble, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this same time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, unless that trouble is cut short, there should no flesh be saved alive. Not a human being would be left alive. Humanity would be erased off the face of the earth. It was during the time that I have been proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom of God. That is the world to come. During this time, the hydrogen bomb has been perfected. And a few of the test bombs have been exploded out in the oceans where they couldn't harm anybody. A hydrogen bomb is 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima and the one that destroyed Nagasaki in Japan. And those atomic bombs destroyed an entire city, each one. A hydrogen bomb will destroy a city as big as London, New York, Tokyo, or this city in which you live right here. And it would destroy every man, woman, and child in it in just a matter of seconds. And we're just that close to extinction. And you need to wake up and realize it. Now everybody thinks, oh, well, it's so terrible, no one would dare do it. But I want to tell you that right now, not only the United States and Russia have the hydrogen bomb, but also England and France and China. They all have the hydrogen bomb. And there are about 30 or 35 other nations that already have nuclear power, and they can produce hydrogen bombs. Some little nation with a madman, and they've had madmen at the head of nations, can set off even an atomic bomb and start, like a domino theory. He can start a succession of such things that the first thing you know, the great nations would be destroying one another. Because whoever gets in the first blow will knock out the other country. But now, why all these things? Why are we going to come to the end of this world? What's wrong with this world anyway? Why do we need to come to the end of it? You are living in a world today of awesome progress. The marvelous mechanisms, awesome things have been developed. But at the same time, keeping pace with it have been appalling evils. And in some nations like India, in some parts of Africa, and even South America, there are people starving to death every day because they don't have enough food to eat. Violence is everywhere in the world today. There has never been a time of violence like we're having now. And there are millions of people that are suffering all over this world, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Do you realize what this world is like? I don't think you do. Now it continues, the next verse. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved alive, but for the elect's sake. That's those that are crying out to God day and night. Those that are praying to God, God's own people. And for their sake, God says he is going to intervene, and those days will be shortened. Now then, immediately after this great tribulation, and it will not last long, at the most 3.5 years, and maybe not that long. But verse 29, continuing right on, says, immediately after the great tribulation, the most frightening time of world trouble that has ever happened, much greater than World War II. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And that is referring to spiritual powers, Satan, the devil, and demons. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the tribes or nations of the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man, or Jesus Christ, coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory and supreme authority to rule all nations and bring in the world tomorrow. That will be a world of peace at last. The sign before he would come, this gospel of the kingdom that he preached would finally be preached into all the world. And I came out preaching that gospel in 1934. And in 1953, it went on the air over in Europe. And now it's gone all around the world. And I know more kings, more presidents, more prime ministers than any other man in this world. I have known your president, Marcos, for the last 12 years. I have seen him many times. I know the kings of this world. I just recently had a second meeting again with the King of Spain, King Juan Carlos. I'm going from here to see King Bhumipol of Thailand. I've been decorated by the Emperor of Japan. And God has sent me to the kings and to the tops of nations even. And this gospel of the kingdom is going to all the world. Now what is going to happen? The great tribulation is going to come next. The hydrogen bomb has come. And you will read back in Ezekiel, the 6th chapter, that all of the great cities are going to be leveled and destroyed. Los Angeles is going to be destroyed. New York is going to be destroyed by hydrogen bombs. I'm telling you that a time more terrifying than anything that ever happened is soon going to happen in this world. It's time we wake up. It's time we get our eyes open. We have lost God. We have forgotten God. And God is going to step in. Satan is ruling this dark world, and it's an unhappy world. Now, I showed you that when this gospel of the kingdom is preached, the next thing will be this great tribulation. Immediately after the great tribulation, they are going to see Christ coming. And Armageddon is going to be here in the end of the world, and Christ is coming as the King of kings and the Lord of lords. So I hope God will lead you, and I hope that you will surrender to God. You have to repent. You have to begin to believe what Christ says and not what the churches teach. And you have to grow in that kind of knowledge, and you have to overcome this world and its ways. And you have to keep enduring and never turn away from it. Many come and then they turn away. Well, they will have to suffer. It's up to you. All I can do is tell you. I have told you, you have been told. Thank you all. We are going to have world peace. That is the message that Christ brought. That's the good news that he announced. and I want to announce it. I have a new booklet. I don't think it's been offered before. World Peace, How It Will Come. It is coming. World Peace. You need to know more about it. This new booklet, I would like to send it to you, no charge. In other words, we don't ask for money. We don't charge for anything. This booklet, World Peace, How It Will Come. So next time, this is Herbert W. Armstrong. Goodbye, friends.
All right, a big thank you to God's end-time Apostle Herbert Armstrong. And brethren, thank you for those of you who joined us tonight for this Friday evening Sabbath Eve Bible study on this 6th day of the 11th month on God's holy sacred calendar. I emphasize the Hebrew calendar, God's holy sacred calendar, brethren, because that will be the calendar that Jesus Christ will be using after he returns as that rock that destroys the Daniel 2 image that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, the image that we have here in the studio on top of these two columns behind me, the image with the great head of gold representing King Nebuchadnezzar, who had the dream that God revealed through Daniel and reported in chapter 2. And then he was the first world-ruling government. Now I'm hearing a noise in the background. I was just wondering if it was our live stream feeding through, but no, it's some people outside that I'll have to remind that, you know, look, I need to put up an on-the-air sign out there, keep people from congregating outside. I have some tenants in the back. All right, but that second world-ruling kingdom is represented by the silver, which you see in the arms. It's part of the neck and the breast. And then the third world-ruling empire is captured in this image above us with the bronze belly and thighs of breast. And then the legs of steel and iron, representing the Roman Empire and its two divisions, Eastern and Western. And the toes, the feet and toes of a combination of miry clay and iron, which don't mix, you know, and yet they're cast together for a short time at the end and give their power to one beast. We saw a reference during Mr. Armstrong's talk to Revelation 17 and verse 10 that says there are 7 kings of this Roman Empire, of this Holy Roman Empire. 5 are fallen. They were Justinian through Napoleon. Justinian, before Otto the Great was Charlemagne. Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto the Great. Charles V was the 4th, and Napoleon was the 5th of those 5 kings that are fallen, that represented the time that the Holy Roman Empire was active between 554 AD and 1814 AD. Then, the Holy Roman Empire, the beast that is the Holy Roman Empire, it was wounded. And wounded like a person going into the hospital sick or wounded or stabbed with a knife or something. Goes into hospital to recuperate and recover and be healed. That beast has been in the abyss, healing. And so, he revived. As verse 8 of Revelation 17 says, that beast that was active between 554 and 1814, then became is not, and yet is, because it wasn't totally killed off, it was just wounded, so it was not and yet is, between 1814 and 1935, a little over 100 years. Then, as the next part of that verse 8 of Revelation 17 says, that beast ascended. We have that verse. I could pop it up on the screen. Oh, all right. You've seen the Daniel 2 beast above us on the screen above us. So we're going to come in. We're going to come on in here. Remove the lower third, and we're going to switch that screen over to the Bible display, and we're going to back it up to the verse when Mr. Armstrong made a reference here to Revelation 17, verse 8 and 10, all right? The beast that you saw was. That means he was active. He was alive, as if it were. Very alive, as the Holy Roman Empire from 554 to 1814. Why 554? Because that's when Justinian revived the imperial form of government. You know, we had imperial schools, we had imperial elementary school, we had imperial high school. That term coming but as it relates to government, it means your government leader is appointed by a religious leader. So you had the emperor of the Roman Empire appointed by the Vatican, making of the combination the Holy Roman Empire. Pope, emperor. You know, two different individuals, but the Pope over the emperor in the sense that the Pope appoints the emperor, but it's like a man or woman riding a horse. The horse is the much greater power, but the one riding the horse, holding the reins, controls that great power. So here you've got a Pope riding this beast, this great, powerful beast, and controlling it. The beast, the emperor, and the whole system of the Roman Empire, with the religious leader picking the leader over that beast. So we have that beast that was, and with the Pope appointing Justinian as the emperor over the world ruling government, that made it an imperial form of government. It went back to that form of government in 554 AD, becoming the Holy Roman Empire, that ran continuously for 1,260 consecutive years. Now, we're going to take some time and explain those. Why 1,260 years? There is a prophetic meaning to that, and it proves something too. We'll go over that another time. For the moment, it had 1,260 consecutive years that it was active. The beast that was active, and is not. It became is not between 1814 and 1935. Again, a little over 100 years. It is not. And at the very end, though, you see, and yet is. It was not, but yet is. So it was wounded. Just wounded, not totally killed out. And not totally killed out, being wounded and reviving and becoming healed, it shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, as it did in its former type, its forerunner type, between 1935 and 1945, in the form of Mussolini. I think I've got a shot here we can throw up on the screen for a second. You know, Hail Caesar. You see Mussolini standing by a statue of Caesar and giving the victory Roman Empire. You know, Hail Caesar, Hail Mussolini. He called himself the new Il Duce, meaning the new Julius Caesar. And he stated that he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. And he was that one that ascended as the forerunner type, as king number 6, between 1935 and 1945. It was God's end-time Apostle Herbert Armstrong who announced that to the world. And not only didn't just announce it, God revealed it through Herbert Armstrong. God revealed it, the Father revealed it through Jesus Christ, who revealed it through Herbert Armstrong. That's the pecking order. Even the early apostles did not know what God revealed through Christ and Herbert Armstrong to the world. King number 6 was your Mussolini that ascended out of the bottomless pit between 1935 and 1945. There is duality in this prophecy, and that shall happen again in an even bigger way. Because when Mussolini was shot in the belly on April 28, 1945, April 28, 1945, 1945, after 9.5 years being the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, from the fall of 1935 to the spring of 1945, it put the beast back into the abyss. Again, duality. See the duality? It was from 554 to 1814, and then is not from 1814 to 1935, and then the duality here, it was again active for 9.5 years, same length of time Napoleon held office, from the fall of 1804 to the spring of 1814, and ended that 1,260 years in the Battle of 1813. The battle that started in 1813 ended in the spring of 1814 with Napoleon being defeated and ending the continuous 1,260-year continuous reign of the Holy Roman Empire. Put it into the abyss, put the empire into the abyss, put the beast into the abyss. Came out in the form of the sixth king, the one is of Revelation 17 verse 10, we'll look at in a moment. That one was king number 6, who ascended out of the bottomless pit, again in the type, the forerunner type of the beast ascending out of the pit in the form of Mussolini. Yeah, I'm just imitating him now. We're not hailing Caesar here. And then put with the shooting of Mussolini in the belly, April 28, 1945, put that beast back into the abyss. That's where we are right now. That beast is in the abyss, recuperating, the wound being healed, so that there will be one more ascension of that beast who shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. But this time he's going to fulfill this whole verse and go into perdition, such that they that dwell on the earth shall wonder with great wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was. It was active between 554 and 1814, and then again between 1935 and 1945, and is not. In between 1814 and 1935, it was wounded, so it wasn't active. Is not, and yet is, because it ascended. It wasn't totally killed. It ascended in the form of Mussolini between 1935 and 1945, and then between 1945 and now, it is not again, and yet is, because it's going to ascend one last time, because verse 10, we'll go to in a moment, says there are 7 kings. So the 5 that are fallen, Justinian through Napoleon, plus the one is Mussolini, who is now fallen, so 6 are gone. Out of 7 kings, that only leaves 1, and that verse 10 of Revelation 17, we'll go ahead and pop over to that verse, says there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. Well, he was only between 1935 and 1945. God saved that to the time of his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong, 1935, 1945. God called Mr. Armstrong in 1927, began the Philadelphia era of his church in 1934 and 33 and 34, and so the one was active, was king number 6 during the early ministry of God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong. That, brethren, those who say, why are you putting Herbert Armstrong on a pedestal, Stephen? I'm not. God did that. God put him on a pedestal, a big pedestal. If you can't see that, you are as blind as a bat. As blind as a bat out of hell. And that's where, your understanding is. It's in the grave if you don't understand this. This is big. God revealed the one through his end-time apostle, H.W.A., Herbert W. Armstrong. You don't like that? You can take that up with God himself. God did that. God put Herbert Armstrong on a big pedestal. He's had no man whose God has escalated to that level since. And it's as if God's got Herbert Armstrong speaking from the grave for us today. You need to get that, brother. Mr. Armstrong pounded that lectern saying, brethren, 50% of you aren't getting it. And then up the ante to 90% of you aren't getting it. Whoa, Mr. Armstrong, how could you say that? Well, wait till the apostasy, and we found out how he could say it. You know, a good half went with the apostasy, if not more than half. The other, a big percentage, 40% of the other half, went with one of these vanity plate Church of God groups, jumping the ship early, prematurely, like Eve picking the apple and saying, hey, I'll just make up my own mind. I'll go here, I'll go there. Not waiting for God, not fasting. Can you be forgiven for that? Yeah, Eve had this put us all on a bad track, you know, but the rest of us who jumped ship here or there, you can be forgiven. Just repent of it. You know, stop supporting these divisive vanity plate Church of God groups. Well, those leaders of those groups, they love me. You know that? They love me. One of my best friends in college who wanted to have lunch with me said, and when we have lunch, don't you go stomping on this church group I'm with. Well, we wound up never having lunch, but because he knew I wasn't going to listen to that finger pointing, you know, don't step on our toes. Well, get yourself out from under those things. Be pure. We're scattered right now. You can preach to people that will voluntarily listen to you, serve them in local areas, but don't put names on. Well, let me ask you, should you be putting names on your local groups that you make yourself the head of and tell them it's now the Laodicean era, which is a big lie? Because the truth is, as God revealed it through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, the Laodicean era as an era does not commence until the fifth seal commences, becomes active. And that hasn't happened yet. That's the Great Tribulation. When that happens, Ezekiel 6:6 is fulfilled. All of your dwelling places are laid waste in the modern cities of the modern-day descendants of Joseph. Ephraim in the United Kingdom, Manasseh in the United States. Yes, Ezekiel 6:6 refers to us, brethren, in the United States and our fellow brothers in the United Kingdom. Yeah, you guys too. All of your dwelling places will be laid waste. The very use of the word dwelling places, brethren, means you're not going to be protected inside your home, as Mr. Armstrong's apostate son used to preach. That's a big bunch of malarkey. Balderdash, as he himself would sometimes say. Balderdash. And the other is not yet come. King number 7 is yet ahead of us. And that's what we should be watching for, and watching those 4 active seals, because when Christ spoke what he spoke in Luke 21:36, he was speaking in between the 4 active seals and the next major event in prophecy, seal number 5, the commencement of the Great Tribulation. How can I say he was speaking in between those? Those 4 seals became active even while Christ was alive. And they've just progressed, been progressively more frequent and more intense with greater impact ever since. And when they become full bloom, and Christ gave the analogy to us of the fig tree and all the trees, when you see their limbs become tender and the little buds on the limb begin to blossom, and when they bloom out, you know that summer is nigh, Christ said. And he added to that an analogy saying, likewise, when you see all these things happen, and he gave this prophecy or analogy of the fig tree in Luke 21, Mark 13, Matthew 24, the Olivet prophecy chapters, where he was revealing in plain language the seals of Revelation. And so that's the context. And so he said, when you see these things happen, he was talking about these seals. When you see these first 4 active seals become full bloom, as they have become now, he said, then know that the kingdom of God is near. Now, the kingdom of God has to go through the 3 before the kingdom of God can come, which comes on the 7th trump of the 7th seal. We have to go through the 5th seal and the 6th seal first, which 5th seal is 3.5 years, and at the 2.5 year point in it, we see the heavenly signs, the 6th seal, the signs in the sun, the moon, the stars. Then we see the half hour of silence in the heavens. First, before the half hour of silence, we see the sealing of the 144,000, which will probably be those in the place of nourishment that Daniel 11, verse 41 describes as a place east of the Jordan River, a tri-regional area there of wilderness. Then a half hour of silence in the heavens, and then that dreadful 7th seal that makes up the last year of the 3.5 years of Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation part of the 5th seal is the outpouring of the wrath of man and Satan. God adds the wrath of God to it for 1 year of the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is the 7th seal, comprised of 7 trumpets. I've got a chart for that I sometimes pop up on the screen. I didn't put it in our slide bank tonight. I'll try to remember to put it in our slide bank for tomorrow. Not tomorrow, for the morning Sabbath service. I say not tomorrow because even though some of you may say, well, Stephen, on the Roman calendar, it's Friday night, and in the morning is Saturday morning, the next day. Yeah, but that's only the next day on the Roman calendar. On God's calendar, it's the same day. This day began at sunset. It doesn't begin at midnight. It began already at sunset wherever you are. Not some time on the clock in the middle of the night. It begins at your local sunset and continues to be the same day through the evening, the night, and the morning until the next sunset. But the 7th king, which is the other who's not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a short space. That short space is your 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, with that last year being the day of the Lord, seal number 7, composed of 7 trumpets. The first 4 of those trumpets being the 4 winds of terrible destruction on the earth to the earth's elements. And then the last 3 of those trumpets being your 3 woes. The 5th and 6th trumpet being your 1st and 2nd woe. And then on the 7th trump, after Christ returns at the start of that 7th trump, he brings with him the 7th angel who has the 7 vials of the 7 last plague that Christ causes to be poured out after he returns, after those of you who've been accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man are transformed from this filthy, rotten, mortal flesh to spirit and immortality. There's nothing immortal about our soul being our body, at this juncture in time. In fact, the soul that sins shall die, and even those who were called to God's first harvest, we have to die spiritually. Even if we remain alive when Christ returns, we've had to have the old man die, which happens at baptism. And Karen, my trip to Texas throws things off. I was about to rent a car and include a zip down to to Florida after doing Texas. But we're going to live stream the memorial, and maybe once we do get together, Texas, or maybe somewhere in between, I meant Florida, or somewhere between Florida and Alabama, we might live stream a baptism. Yeah, and maybe I want to talk to your son. I got an idea, because if the fellows are stuck in New York too long, before we can get that done, then I'll give that opportunity maybe to your own son to do the baptism if he'd like to. I'll just do the laying on of hands. I love it when 1 Corinthians 7 church kids say, I want this first resurrection, which you have to say, as God's end-time apostle explained to us, as God revealed the understanding to him that he shared with us, that those of you who grow up in the church, you are not cut off from God the same way the rest of the world's kids are cut off if you have at least one parent who's called to the spring harvest. You are not cut off from God the way the rest of the world is. However, as God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong told us, you have to tell God, God, I want this. I want it. And then he says, okay, he might put you through a little testing, a little delay first, to make sure you really want it, and you can have it. Those of us who came out of this world, some of us had to beg God to show us, where is your true church? I see in the Bible, it says, Matthew 16:18, Christ speaking there, saying, I, Jesus Christ, will build my church. Some of us caught on to that and said, okay, it's not a bunch of churches. It's not like in the Protestant world, 500,000, maybe not that many, but dozens and dozens of different denominations, Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, etc., and the Catholic Church. Well, the Catholic Church is not Protestant because the Protestant churches protested against the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church, the Bible calls the mother of the harlots. And some recognized that and said, well, all that conjunction of mess is not God's church. God said, I will build my church, not my churches ad infinitum. And some of you that are forming all these vanity plate Church of God groups should take the principle involved there and think about it. What we used to preach about God is not the author of confusion and all these various denominations. And what have some of the, what is the splinter world here in the Church of God? It's denominations, with one minister picking this adjective and another picking that adjective, such that I've referred to them as your banana peeling Churches of God groups. Because as grammar people will say about an adjective, they say the adjective is the banana peeling of the parts of speech. And so ministers who create these vanity plate Church of God groups, if they find out, this other minister, he picked that adverb or adjective that I wanted, so I got to look around for another one. Okay, the one called it the ABC Church of God, I'll call mine the XYZ Church of God. And the LMO has been taken, so I'll call it the QPZ, whatever. They all pick a different adjective, and as some people have recognized after finishing the correspondence course and saying, God's built one church, not zillions of them, not creating confusion like has been done, which needs to be undone. Ministers and brethren, you ministers are my fellow brethren, so look, God's given me a message for you. I've got my red leather jacket on tonight, giving you that message in the cold of winter. Are you going to hear it? Are you going to heed it? Or no, we're not going to undo our group. I'd lose my position. I'd lose my paycheck. Probably not as much as you think, really, if you just stick with teaching the truth the way God gave it to us through his end-time apostle without compromising it. You might find people you serve in your local area would say, hey, you're teaching the truth without compromise. Here's the tithe I owe God, and God tells me in ending your financial worries, I need to give it to a man who's preaching without compromise. Brethren, some of you local ministers, if you'd catch on to that, some local brethren who would love to have you be under your hat, under your wing, they would support you, and they'd properly do so if you were not compromising. But every single one of the vanity plate church or groups out there, you check their website, brethren, you'll see they have all compromised the truth. Not worse than compromised. They've all flipped the truth God gave us through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong about when the Laodicean era as an era begins. It begins after Philadelphia. Those in Philadelphia who are accounted worthy to escape. There are some in Philadelphia who will not be accounted worthy to escape, who will be left behind, who become the Revelation 12 verse 17 remnant, which remnant is the beginning of the Laodicean era, who God tells in Revelation 3 verse 18, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fiery trial of martyrdom. And there's your key, right in the dead center of the 9 verses in the Bible that directly address the Laodicean era. The first 4 verses tell you their condition. Yes, their condition exists now. The attitude of Laodicea was with us even while Mr. Armstrong was alive. And he would pound that lectern and say, brethren, we are in danger of becoming, not we have become, but in danger of becoming the Laodicean era. That was a prophetic warning to the time after the 5th seal commences, because that's when that era commences. We can be in danger of becoming left behind when that era begins if we remain in a Laodicean attitude. But up until that time, you, if you have that attitude and see it, have opportunity and time to repent of that attitude, brethren. Then you can be on board the ship with Noah, symbolically speaking, when the 5th seal commences. And it's just prior to that, in the 30 days prior to that, that God sends the Revelation 12 verse 14 eagles for those who are accounted worthy to escape. We're out of time, and I've got to cut right there to finish on time. But I think hopefully you got the point of that. And we're watching for king number 7. Brethren, we'll pick up again. We'll pick up in the morning with the regular Sabbath service. Thank you for those of you who joined us here tonight for the Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for this 6th day of the 11th month, Friday night, January 7, 2022 on the Roman calendar. Brethren, I hope you will get a good night's sleep. Be ready for coming before God reverently for the Sabbath service in the morning. We'll begin it at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:30 a.m. Central Time, 2:30 p.m. and 3:30 in the United Kingdom areas, and 4:30 and 5:30 p.m. in the Middle East, Israel and surrounding areas. So until then, brethren, happy Sabbath and Shabbat Shalom.